Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast, and we are back for another exciting episode. This is going to be one that's going to go down in our history books. Joining us, as always, from Texas is our buddy Dennis. Dennis, how you doing tonight, fella?
Doing good. Doing really great. Excited about the show tonight. Super stoked about this. If you can see over my head, you see this. I'm pointing to this mug above me, above my mug.
Is that Eisenhower?
It's Eisenhower.
It's Eisenhower mug. And I recall when I was in college in 1993, I was sick as a dog. And since I was in college, I could still use my dad's benefits. So I went to Tinker Air Force Base, sitting in the ER, miserable. And I look up at the TV, and Conan O'Brien is sitting there just making my night better, making me laugh. And I recall seeing on his desk the Eisenhower mug. And here recently, I was in Kerrville and saw it at an antique shop and totally flipped out. So that is an awesome acquisition that I've always had my eye on for, since the 1990s. So, but super stoked about our show tonight. Super
and sitting in for Jeff Copsetta once again is our friend and return guest, Mr. Zach Morris. Zach, thank you for joining us again. How are you doing tonight, fella?
Doing very well. Super excited for our guest tonight.
Well, without any further ado, why don't you introduce our very esteemed guest tonight, and let's get this show going, because we're all excited.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Don. So please forgive me for a bit of a long-winded introduction here, but we have a very special guest tonight. He is the producer of the brand new World War II miniseries, Masters of the Air, which is now streaming on Apple TV. He is also the producer of a ton of others, including mine and Dennis's favorite show of all time, the HBO miniseries, The Pacific. But even more than that, he was an instructor at UCLA's world-renowned screenwriting program, where he was one of my favorite teachers of all time. And it was there that I saw firsthand just how hard and passionately he works to help shape the future of the young writers of tomorrow. He is a dear friend and mentor of mine, the man running things over at Playtone in Hollywood right now, Mr. Kirk Saduski. Thank you so much, Kirk, for joining us.
Well, Zach, thank you very much for that. A bit inflated in the sense of, believe me, I don't run Playtone. There are a couple other guys,
Had to hype you
Barry
up.
Goetzman and Tom Hanks, that have a little bit running.
Right?
Some Thomas Hanks fella?
Yeah, but and also co-producer of Masters of the Year. We had several producers, but thank you. And yes, I remember that class very well, Zach, or those classes very well. I taught at UCLA for several years, and I eventually just had too many things going on, so I had to give it up. But maybe someday. I still have a lot of the papers you guys wrote. I still have some of my lecture notes. So maybe someday I'll come back.
We hope so. But let's get right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this new series, Masters of the Air? What's it all about? Tell us about the Mighty Eighth.
So I will say, some time ago now, several years ago, HBO called Playtone. And because we had done Band of Brothers in the Pacific, they said, well, we'd like to do another World War II series with you guys. So we had done the Marines, as you mentioned, in the Pacific. We had done the Army in Band of Brothers. We knew it was going to have to be either the Navy or the Air Force. And we discovered, we were already familiar with a book by Don Miller, a great historian, called Masters of the Air. And
he's talking about this one right here for those.
I am talking about that one. And so when we read the book, we knew immediately that it was going to be for a minute, we thought, could we possibly do the Air Force and the Navy in one big series, cover both services? We realized quickly that was a foolish idea. Both dramatically, it would be incoherent, and wouldn't be coherent enough. But equally important, it would have been astronomically expensive. So we had to focus on the Air Force. Don's book was the obvious choice. It's narrative military history at its best. And then it's about the 8th Air Force during World War II. And that's a huge topic. So how do we how did we narrow it down to tell, because it's essentially the story of one particular bomb group that was based in East Anglia at Thorpe Abbotts, which is in East Anglia, England. And Don, led the way. When you read the book, he opens talking about these particular characters, Major John Egan, Major Gail Cleven, and the so-called Bloody Hundredth, the 100th Bomb Group. And he did such an extraordinary job of leading us through and kind of teasing us, because we come back to them. The book is about the entire 8th Air Force, so it's an enormous book. And the 100th is just a part of it, but we thought it was the part of it that would help us illustrate the experience best. As extraordinary characters, remarkable relationships, particularly between Cleven and Egan. The kind of things that you look for, remember, Zach, the kind of stuff we would talk about in class. What do you look for when you're looking to dramatize something? The specific name of the class that I taught, if you remember, was dramatizing nonfiction for film and television. So when you're looking for stories that you're going to have fealty to, I mean, we're not going to make it up. This is real stuff. These are real men. Excuse me. And excuse me one second. So, we play at Playtone, Gary and Tom, they're very strict about us not veering very far from the truth. So all of that added up. We knew we had the right material with Don's book. We had a relationship with Don because he helped us a bit on the Pacific. And so we started the process, and we wanted to recreate a little bit of what it was like, what Band of Brothers was, and which was really a love story between men. That we always used to say about Band of Brothers is a story about a group of men who at the beginning of the story wouldn't have occasioned a cup of coffee, and by the end of the story would be willing to die for each other. So we wanted to incorporate that and focus on the 100th Bomb Group, and in particular a few of the relationships, but then also try to capture something of what we tried to do in the Pacific, was convey as much as you can on film, the experience of combat, the unique experience of combat, how chaotic, how dramatic, obviously life and death stakes, because when you're in drama, you're trying to constantly reveal the characters that your story is about. And there's no better crucible to reveal character than combat. It's so dramatic. The stakes couldn't be higher, both on a personal level and quite often on a macro level. Certainly in World War II, both were the case. So we started a long journey to tell Masters of the Air.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest differences between Band of Brothers and the Pacific. And you really have to watch Pacific. Well, we all watch all those series multiple times anyhow, but the general viewer really needs to give Pacific 2 runs through, because there's so much going on. As you said, Band of Brothers, it's about character development. It's about the brotherhood, as you said, the love story. Whereas the Pacific, you have that, but it's also about, you guys really focused and did such a great job on, not only are they fighting the Japanese, they're fighting the damn weather. They're fighting mental breakdown, the hardship, the whole, the actual horrors of war. I think it's fair to say the Pacific actually showed more of with the exception of the concentration camps from Band of Brothers, obviously. But as far as the foot slogger, frontline, living in a foxhole, being surrounded by dead bodies that you can't pull out of there because you're pinned down by Japanese, you guys really did a great job focusing on the dysentery, just the rough and tumble livelihood of being stranded on those islands until, reinforcements arrive. And I think the general public who don't have the lust for World War II and that realism, some of them were a little bit thrown off by that, but I think a lot of them came back around. And to that point, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, Don, you're so right. And there is a glamour to the European theater that the Pacific,
romanticized.
It is. And just even by the nature, I mean, if if part of your story is liberating Paris and liberating Dutch and Belgian towns and having pretty women come out and kiss the soldiers, and And I remember when we were doing Band of Brothers, and someone at one point early in the process was, okay, well, how do we provide context for this story? Really is a story about a group of men. It could have been in some ways, it could have been a story about an Arctic expedition or a cattle drive. Again, men coalescing together and doing dangerous things, and then particularly for a certain cause. They want to get the cattle to Topeka, kind of thing. Only obviously Band of Brothers is a true story, and the only context we really needed was the swastika.
Yeah.
As soon as you see that, you get the context.
Yep.
The Pacific, it's more complex. You're right. The environment, with the exception of the Bastogne episodes in Band of Brothers, environment wasn't necessarily that big of a factor. In the Pacific, it's constantly a factor. Whether you're on Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, Iwo Jima, certainly Okinawa. And so that was a big thing. And it's more experiential than the Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
There's obviously overlap. And we also told three separate stories, in the Pacific, with the Sledge story, the Basilone story, the Lecky story. So that doesn't lend itself to as much, the romanticizing, as you said, the romanticizing of it. So in fact, we wanted to de-romanticize as much as we could, but still be dramatically compelling and want you to be invested in the characters in the Pacific.
I got to ask you this question, because when somebody like me ever have the opportunity to ask someone like you who's produced so many projects that people in this community love so much, and that is, do you guys have any idea how anticipated Masters of the Air was? You can go back to this podcast has been around since 2018, and as soon as just the slightest little leak, people in the World War II community, the living history community, the multimedia community who love Band of Brothers, we were just literally looking for anything we could find. Just kind of, what's it? Ooh. It was like, not to get a little too off, but it's like,
and half of our job in those days was trying to quell rumors.
You guys are the methadone clinics, and we're the attic. Like, ooh, we need just a little taste. Yeah.
Yeah, we did know, and for many reasons. First of all, and not just me, I'm sorry, but Playtone, Tom and Gary as well. We have a very close relationship with the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I'm on the presidential council down there. Tom and Gary were involved in the founding. So we knew through them, of course. And yes, we knew the impact of Band of Brothers in the Pacific, particularly Band of Brothers. And so we knew. And then we also worked very closely. There's something called the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. And that's the families of the men who were in the 100th Bomb Group. And we contacted them very early on, and we worked extremely closely with that foundation. And I don't think we could have done the show without them, because, we, unfortunately, I will say, and this was really why it was so important to work with the foundation, is unlike Band of Brothers in the Pacific, where we knew a lot of the men we portrayed, particularly in Band of Brothers. I mean, we met Richard Winters and Carwood Lipton and Shifty Powers and Bill Garney. I became good friends with both Major Winters and Sergeant Garnier. And in the Pacific, I got to know a number of the guys. I didn't get to meet Sledge or Lecky. Obviously, Basilone was killed on Iwo Jima, but we got to know their families very well. I got to know Sid Phillips very well, and Chuck Tatum and some of the other guys that we portrayed. Masters of the Air, nobody that we portrayed was alive when actually, there was one, Alexander Jefferson, who was second lieutenant in the show, eventually became a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He was still alive, and he was one of the Tuskegee pilots. And he was still alive, and we were actually on our way to interview him in Detroit for the documentary we made when he passed. So we didn't get to meet him either. He was at 100 years old. So the foundation became that much more important to us, because they were able to there were some guys that were still alive from the 100th that we were able to talk to. They weren't characters in the episode, uh, uh, but they had the same experiences. Bob Wolf was somebody we interviewed, and he was in the same stalag as Clevin and Egan, so we got to firsthand accounts. So we worked with the foundation, and through the foundation, we heard that we got a sense of how eagerly anticipated. And then back in around 2018, we were invited, and I say we, me and Don Miller and John Orloff, who was our primary screenwriter on Masters of the Air, and was also a writer on Band of Brothers. In fact, he wrote the concentration camp episode. We were invited by the British government or the English government or the tourist bureau really to come over to East Anglia and talk about all the rumors, because I will say, guys, because of my relationship with the museum in New Orleans, they do a lot of tours. And in fact, I'm going to make a little bit of a sales pitch here. The World War II Museum in New Orleans is the real deal. And they do tours based on Band of Brothers. They do the Italian campaign, and they've been doing a Masters of the Air, and they're really worthwhile if you have the time and money to do it. But they've been doing a Masters of the Air tour for quite a while that Don Miller would lead. And after the show came out, they asked me if I would join Don and talk about the production. And I have to tell you, we traveled around East Anglia and London, but in East Anglia, which is Cambridge and Norwich, and where really all the 8th Air Force bomber bases were. And it was a phenomenon. I mean, it was huge over there. So yes, but anyway, I was going to say earlier in about 2018, we were invited by the Tourist Bureau to come over, and we saw the anticipation then. So yes, Don, we were pretty much aware of it.
Before we leave this topic, speaking of anticipation, I need to even more double down on Don's comment about how highly anticipated this was. I have to tell you this story, Kirk. Me and my friend, shout out to my best friend Brian, we had been anticipating this for so long. Any little tweets or anything coming out on updates, we were updating. When it finally did air in January of last year, I flew all the way out to Denver. We had a huge watch party and everything for the first 2 episodes. So I had to tell you that. I'm never going to probably be able to get a chance to tell you that again. Like, I had to tell you that story. But you also took my next question. I was going to say if you guys actually worked with any of the veterans from the 100th Bomb Group.
Yes.
From this movie.
And again, the more the families, in the sense, by this point, I mean, they were all in their mid-90s or older. So there's only so much. As opposed to in the Pacific and Band of Brothers, particularly Major Winters, and Bill Garnier, and then in the Pacific, Sid and Chuck Tatum and a few of the others were very, very helpful. This was really more about the foundation. They have a guy named Mike Faley, a guy named Matt Mabe, who work with the foundation. They were extraordinarily helpful. And then we were working with Don Miller. Don was very generous. John Orloff, who I mentioned as the writer, did really just buried himself in the research and thinking, because, for John, it was, in Band of Brothers, we had the book. We had Ambrose's book, and that was our Bible, really. I mean, Eric Jenderson, who was our lead writer on that one, were spectacular, took the book and then expanded on it in our Bible. But we had the book in Band of Brothers. We had the Sledge and Leckie books in the Pacific. And Don's book, as great as it is, it's not a narrative about the 100th. The 100th is in there, and it's a significant part. So John Orloff had to really kind of craft a narrative and fill in some of the spaces that Don just didn't get into in his book, because he had a much bigger goal. So we did research in a lot of areas. The 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia was very helpful to us. The World War II Museum, like I mentioned, in New Orleans. So between all those archives and the Imperial War Museum at Duxford in Great Britain, we didn't lack for material.
speaking of writing, this is kind of a screenwriting question for you, but when you're writing the screenplay, the dialogue for these scenes in the story, and as you said, unlike Band of Brothers, where you had a lot of the gentlemen you could refer to or have their books, when you're writing dialogue and you're trying to fill in these blanks, how do you go about being careful to make sure you're lending the correct voice to the correct character? Because everybody has their own personality, their own voice, their own feelings. And when you're a single person writing that script and you have so many characters, like in any of these series, there's more than just two main characters. You have so many different people. How do you make sure that you're lending authenticity and honesty to that particular character's voice without, getting it kind of muddled with anybody else?
Yeah, that's a great one. It's a good question, Don, because then it's a big challenge, and John Orloff would be the one be the better person to answer it in the extent because he had to do it. But we worked he certainly did. We worked you you do a lot of research, not just on what happened on any particular mission, but really you immerse yourself. And everyone, the actors have to do this, the directors, anybody in a creative position, immerse yourself in the time as much as you can and make it so that you're true to the time and the language and the patois used, but you have to make it sound familiar to a modern ear. So it's a balance. And then differentiating between characters is I think that's certainly a talented that calls upon the talent of the writer first of all, but then also the actors. I mean, the way they come to embody, and you can differentiate because Cleven is very different from Egan, and they're both very different from Robert Rosenthal, etc. The directors have to, that's the other thing. How are those actors given that dialogue? How are they directed to deliver it, and how are they framed? And so a lot of people have to do their jobs well to be able to do. But it starts with having great, interesting characters like we had in the 100th, and then it's having a dedicated, talented screenwriter like we had in John Orloff.
Dennis, you have any questions?
Yes.
I was gonna say, Dennis, I know you've been dying to jump in.
Absolutely. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. And as an avid World War II historian and just enthusiast and writer, I thank you for preserving these story for all time. And if someone there's a lot of folks that are just not readers, and they have that opportunity now to know about this history and to really see the sacrifices that were made for them. And so thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. What I would say, before you ask a question, Dennis,
Yes, sir.
what I would urge you guys to do is encourage people to read. In other words, I get it, and I know a lot of the stuff we've done. More people probably saw John Adams, this series we did, than read the David McCullough's book, as much of a bestseller as it was. And we're very cognizant of that. But I would urge people to, again, with Masters of the Air, if you're a fan of that series, I promise you will be enthralled by Don's book. And so there's something about great, particularly narrative history, that can be every bit as compelling as a good movie or series that covers the same territory. And I would say even more so because you can live with it, you can put it down, you can think about it and come back to it. They go hand in hand. And I think this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but the fact that people are reading less and less is irksome to me, to be honest with you. People ask, I'm sure Zach, you probably did, and a lot of your fellow students, hey, how did you get in, how did you get your job and all that kind of stuff. And I will tell you, the single most important thing that's led to whatever success I've had is the fact that I've read all my life. I just met with a group of students from my graduate school alma mater, and of course they asked me those questions. What's your advice? Read. What I asked every student I met, what are you reading right now? What's on your proverbial nightstand? And I was disappointed to hear these are college students, and They're not. They're not reading. Anyway, I will leave it at that. That's something that I talk about all the time. But
And not to cut Dennis off, but that's a very good point. I'm the perfect example of that. I grew up with a learning disability. Couldn't read. I did not start reading until I was 22. Moved to California from Ohio after 9/11, got laid off, started going to school for computers. Microsoft stuff, boring. I was at LAX. Someone got me a Books A Million book gift card for Christmas. I thought it was the biggest waste because I didn't read. I got Beyond Band of Brothers, a story about Babe Heffron and Garnier, and I read it cover to cover. Every book on that bookshelf behind me, I've read. Not only has it improved my vocabulary, improved my cognitive, it improved my damn eyesight. I went from having no line bifocals in elementary school to having to get new, less strong glasses in my mid-20s because I was actually exercising my eyes for the first time in my life. And so reading it helps substantially. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Can I tell you a Babe Heffron story?
absolutely.
Please.
Oh yeah.
I got to know Babe and Bill, particularly Bill. I got to know them both pretty well. I'll tell you two things. One, when we decided to do the Pacific, I called the guy, some of the Easy Company guys that I knew best. Babe was one of them. And when I called them and I said, hey, so we're going to do another one. This time we're going to do the Marines. And Babe interrupted me before I could go any further. And he said, it's about time.
Yeah.
Well, another one, though. I was in Philadelphia on another project, walking. We were with a camera crew and walking down the street in Philadelphia. And I heard this guy, hey, Kirk Saduski. Hey, kid, get over here. I look over. It's Babe Heffron sitting on a stoop in the afternoon. Sure, he had some libation. He had a libation with him. And went over, of course, just totally coincidental. We happened to be in Babe's neighborhood. I will tell you one other, reminds me of because you guys are Pacific fans, which gladdens me greatly.
Oh, I got the box set right behind me in that closet.
Yeah, as you can tell. So
Love it. When I called Major Winters to tell him, and I said, and we're going to base it on a book, we're going to base part of it on a book called With the Old Breed. That's all I said. And Winters immediately, he interrupted me and he said, he didn't interrupt me, he commented. He said, Sledge is a legend. I didn't say we're doing With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge, or I just said we're doing With the Old Breed. And Dick Winters said to me, Sledge is a legend. And when Richard Winters calls another soldier, Marine, another warrior, a legend, you listen.
Absolutely.
And what he meant was that he's a legend because of the way he wrote about his experience. He had a perfectly honorable career in the Marines. He didn't win the Medal of Honor, but he did everything right, courageous. But why a legend? Not Marines, but tens of thousands of Marines did their duty and were courageous and honorable. Why was Sledge a legend? Because of the way he wrote about it. Mm-hmm. It's, again, talk about reading. If you're a fan of the Pacific and you can only, I urge you to read his book. It reads like a novel, but it's true. It's a true red badge of courage. It's extraordinary.
I have With the Old Breed, I have Helmet for My Pillow, I have You'll Be Sorry, and then I have Lecky's other books, and I think Dennis is the same. I have all of them. To that point, I remember when PBS did that documentary, The War, and Sid Phillips was on it. I was at the bookstore, and sadly, Books A Million or whatever had the coffee table book on sale, and I picked it up, and I was reading it, and as you know, Sid had the excerpt of With the Old Breed, and this is before you guys did the show or even announced it. I read that, quickly went on eBay, got a 1981 softback for like $13, read it, told my wife, I said, if Tom Hanks and him does another series, it needs to be on this guy right here. This is a fantastic book. And she's like, well, I was like, no, you don't understand. This is a fantastic. And I think 5 months later, the announcement came out that you guys were going to do the Pacific, and I was sold from right then and there. So
Don, why don't you come to Hollywood and become a producer? You obviously have a good taste.
I lived in Long Beach for 3 years. No one wanted me. I went to school for computers and Irvine. But go ahead, Dennis, please.
I think I interrupted before you got a chance to ask your question.
Oh, thank you for doing that. That was all amazing. No, I agree. I'm an avid reader myself, and read With the Old Breed dozens of times.
Yes.
Mine's all marked up and highlighted and dog-eared. And
Yes.
um, one of the greatest compliments that I could give a book is that, and this is what I was telling my girls, my two kids about, is that when if you're in a theater and you're watching something, or you're at home and you're watching something, that the dogs are barking, and folks are getting up and they're getting popcorn, and you're being taken out of it, but there's just something about the experience of reading a book that, and I was telling my girls that sometimes you actually put a shawl over your shoulders because you're getting cold, because you're reading about Shackleton, or some of the writings that my dad and I have done about his time in Iraq is, we've had readers tell us, I could feel the heat.
Yep.
I could feel the sand blowing into my face. And you miss that. I think it's a totally different experience with reading. And
Yeah.
in that regard, Sarah, but a little bit similar to that, but not much maybe perhaps, but this immediately came to mind listening to your career and the different projects you've been involved in, and all this great stuff. I wanted to ask, was there ever a moment, or perhaps from Band of Brothers, Pacific, Masters of the Air, where you had to pinch yourself that you were there watching a scene that unfolded before you? Maybe it was live when they were actually doing something. Are there any scenes like that that really stand out?
I would say not at the moment, Dennis, but later that day. In the moment, you're in the moment. And so I don't recall that. I mean, there are times when you just take stock and go, look where I am. Look what I'm getting to do. Well, look what I get to do. But quite often, and I'm lucky enough, listen, I was last 2 weeks ago with the World War II Museum. They invited me and asked me to, they do, like I said, Easy Company tours, where you essentially trace Easy Company from Aldbourne in England all the way into Bavaria. And I went on part of the trip and was, because so many people, and it was, God, I think there were almost 80 guests. There were 2 full buses of people. And I mean, I realized, and we went, I was on Omaha Beach last June 6th, a couple weeks ago. I never thought in my life I'd ever get a chance to do something like that. So I get to do all these, in addition to that kind of, you're back at the hotel room, or back at home, depending where you're shooting at the end of a day. And yeah, what happens to me, or what has happened, is you start, I'll tell you, let me think about this. When we first read Masters of the Air, when we were reading and we read about Clevin and Egan, and it's really what told me that this is our story, especially the relationship between those two guys. And because it reminded me of one of my favorite, not both novels and series, called Lonesome Dove.
I love that
I
book.
don't know if any of you guys or any of your audience, again, and I would urge you to both watch and to read. But it's one of my favorite things, basically because of the relationship between Augustus McCrae and Captain Cole.
Absolutely.
Anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is, I know, last year at some point, I know Robert Duvall's I know both of his stepdaughters a little, pretty well. Anyway, Nancy called me, and there was something, she was asking my advice or needed something. And she said, oh, by the way, me and Bobby really love Masters of the Air. And I got to convey through Nancy to him that he was the inspiration.
Oh, wow.
That his portrayal of Augustus McCrae and his relationship with Tommy Lee Jones as the Captain Call character was, in my mind, when we read Masters of the Air and read about Clevin and Egan, I said, well, if we can come close to what they did. Anyway, and I'm saying this because I got to convey that to Robert Duvall. I mean, not personally, not directly, but I know because Nancy then said, oh, thank you. He really appreciated that. That's the kind of opportunity. It's imagine, I mean, I can't compare it, but imagine if you could say to Ike, just, God, what you've meant to me.
For sure.
I'm not comparing making movies
No.
with what General Eisenhower did, but you understand.
So as somebody who's been carrying a firearm for over 13 years daily, one of the biggest inconveniences is when you come home, you need to take your firearm off of yourself and put it somewhere safe, somewhere secure, especially if you have kids. Now, I know most of us are responsible. We have a gun safe somewhere, but let's be honest, usually these gun safes are big, they're bulky, they're kind of out of the way because they're a bit of an eyesore. Your wife doesn't want them where everybody can see them, so sometimes they're in your closet behind some clothes, sometimes they're in the garage, sometimes they're in the mudroom. And let's be honest, taking your firearm out and walking to those locations to secure it is a pain in the butt, but you have to be a responsible firearm owner, especially if you have kids in the house. That's why you need to get yourself a Stopbox Pro portable gun safe. You can make it non-portable. You can drill some holes in it and mount it to a place of convenience in your house, but it requires no batteries and no electricity. You simply come in your house, walk up to your safe, choose your finger button combinations, open a safe, remove your firearm from your person, put it in the safe. If you close your safe, just that easy, it's secure. So do yourself a favor, head over to stopboxusa.com/D410 and get all the information today on your Stopbox Pro. When seconds count, trust the only non-fail firearm storage box, Stopbox Pro, at stopboxusa.com/D410. Yeah, we understand, especially the audience we have that are World War II reenactors, and what I mean by that, and I just had this weird thought, this phrase, it's almost like the blessing of the history for repaying people like you and us for what we're doing to help keep the memory alive. And here's what I mean by that. As a living historian, we find ourselves in weird opportunities that the general public doesn't have, i.e. being on a flight line at an air show in front of a P-47 Mustang in a full uniform. Myself, on the 80th anniversary of Tarawa, found myself in a landing craft landing on Fort Morgan, Alabama in full uniform with the grandson of Sonny Bonnyman Jr. behind me in a boat, the author of Bones of Our Grandfathers, reenacting this, being invited out to the National Museum of Pacific War to participate. And Zach and Jeff, who's on our show, we end up getting to do things that are World War II related that no one else gets to do simply because of the effort we put into the history and for you, the effort that you put in. The thing that's Masters of the Air, the Pacific, Band of Brothers, the thing, and even, let's be honest, Saving Private Ryan, the thing that they all have in common is they span the gap between the World War II aficionados and the people who could care less on a normal day. Half the people in this audience, their wife will sit down and will let them watch Band of Brothers for the 83rd time, and she'll sit there and enjoy it. I don't know if you're on TikTok. This came out this morning.
Well, I can't.
It's hard to see. It's like a 6-year-old.
And I'm not on TikTok, so
it's
please.
It's a 6-year-old girl, and her mom asked her what she wants to watch for TV and wants to watch today.
I want to watch Band of Brothers.
What did she say?
She said Band of Brothers.
She said, I want to watch Band of Brothers. And her dad's looking at the wife like, yeah, she does. She said, I want to watch Band of Brothers. 79,000 views in 18 hours because this little girl wants to watch Band of Brothers with her dad.
Well, and I will tell you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that is one of the defining things. Jeff tells us every year on Veterans Day, him and his wife and his kids sit down and watch the entire Band of Brothers series.
A lot of people have told us that, particularly with Band of Brothers. Apparently, there's becoming something of a Masters of the Air. Mm-hmm. And again, the Pacific is kind of a tough thing, again, because of the nature of it. It doesn't lend itself to that kind of, especially all family viewing. But I will say that of all the greatest compliment we always get, and when we did Masters of the Air and we invited, there were six living members of the 100th Bomb Group that came to Los Angeles for the premiere.
Oh, wow.
And right after the premiere, we got, big thumbs up from all 6 guys they watched the first episode and, or the first couple episodes, I think, and explained, why they thought. And so that's always the greatest thing. That's always the greatest compliment. That's always better than any award you get. But the other one is it's happened now a lot. It's happened more recently, where people will come up to me. I've had it happen in New Orleans, down at the museum when I'm at events down there, just at various events for promoting Masters of the Air, or just anything where I was at a Dodger game, and a very famous rock and roller came up to me and Gary Goetzman and thanked us for Masters of the Air. And he
Wow.
said, because now I understand my dad.
Mm.
Oh,
And
wow.
his dad, in fact, his dad wasn't in the Air Force. His dad was in the Army, but his dad was at the Battle of the Bulge. And what he meant was, now I understand his dark moods.
Yeah.
Now I understand maybe why he drank a little bit too much. Now I understand when he would retreat into a shell. And it was really interesting because his father was in World War II, but wasn't in a B-17. But hearing that, and we've heard that a lot, now I understand my dad. Now you've given me my dad didn't talk about it, but now I understand why.
Sir, one
It's
of
the
the
best.
greatest moments in the Pacific for me personally, that meant the most to me, and especially with my battles, that are from my own personal battles with PTSD after working in emergency medicine for 23 years. And the scene that's made the most impression on me, and just is one of my all-time favorites, is Sledge returns from Peleliu, and they're coming off the ship, and there's the Red Cross ladies there, and they're dispensing donuts and
Yeah.
lemonade. And Eugene is staring at her like she's reminding him of a world that once was, but he can't quite remember what that world was. And he doesn't understand. He's trying to understand how it's possible that something so beautiful, so clean, so infinitely against everything he's seen, how
Mhm.
it's standing in front of him. And the lieutenant says, ha ha ha, you've had your look see, go ahead and move along. And Sledge gives the lieutenant a look like, I will plunge my K bar right into the top of your head.
Yeah.
And he pulls it off. And it's
Yes.
just
Yeah.
beautiful.
That gap between I will tell you guys, that's the cliche that particularly in the early days, it's not that the cliche was that the men didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about their experience. Certainly when we were making Band of Brothers, that was the thought. And it was true. I mean, a lot of the family would tell us, yeah, Dad, Grandpa, Uncle Bob, Uncle Bill never really talked about it. And I asked a lot of guys, particularly in those days when there were a lot of guys I could ask, why didn't you talk about it? And they would give me two answers, common answers. One is, why would I talk about and describe the worst things I've ever seen to the people I love the most? And the other one that was even maybe more common was, if you weren't there, you can't understand.
Mm.
And so they would talk to each other. That's what the reunions are about. But I can't. So I think it's that kind of. I think that's what we were trying to say in that scene in the Pacific, is that once you've, who was it that referred to? This is a Civil War term, the elephant. Once you've seen the elephant, it's just there's a gap, there's a divide. Those who've seen it, and those who haven't, and those who haven't. I mean, that's why Sledge's book. That's what Winters was talking about. Sledge wrote so well about it that he did two things. He wrote so well about it so that we could begin, those of us who have never been, not just obviously at Peleliu, but in any kind of combat, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere, we can begin to understand what it does to a person inside, and mentally, emotionally, physically. But he also did it in a way that it was so honest that the men who had done it recognized it. Apparently, what the snafu character in the Pacific, Corporal Shelton apparently hadn't talked to Sledge in years, and then when Sledge published the book, contacted him and they reconnected. I'll tell you one other Sledge story. You guys know Henry Sledge, right? Is he
Yeah,
on
he was a
on the
co-host on his podcast for over a year. He actually, when he left this podcast to write his manuscript for his new book.
Gotcha.
Well, one of my favorite stories is he would always tell us that the one time he met Snafu, he big timed him because he went out to play basketball instead of sitting there talking to him.
There's a true story. We had done we had the final episode 10 of the Pacific. We had a rough cut that not even more than a rough cut. We had a cut of the show, and we wanted to show the Sledge family. And Jean, his widow, not Eugene, but Jean was still alive, Henry's mother. We took it down to Montevallo, where Jean lived, and it was Henry and his brother John and their wives and Jean, and it was me and another producer. And we're watching episode 10. We didn't want to show them a combat episode yet. Anyway, it's episode 10. And if you recall, it's after the war. Eugene is at home. He's sitting under the tree in his front yard. And he's just kind of listless. And he has no direction. And he's suffering from what we would now call PTSD. And his mother said to him, Eugene, what's to become of you? And I swear this is true. Sitting next to me was 9-month-old Jack Sledge. And just as she said that, little Jack kind of gave a little baby gurgle, as if to say, this is what becomes of him.
Wow.
Me, my father, my uncle. And I remember thinking that could not have just happened. And I looked over at my colleague Jennifer, who was with me on that trip, and we looked at each other like, "Are you kidding me?" And we've confirmed it. I know the Sledge family pretty well. I've seen them. I've seen Henry and I've seen John since. And every time I say, "Guys, did that really happen?" Yeah, that really. It was like Eugene reaching up. Or reaching down from heaven, saying, "Speak up, speak for me, Jack."
Yeah, I think Henry actually told that story to us before.
Did he really? Yeah. Oh, one of the. That's the more, Dennis. That's more the kind of rather than I'm on the set and something happens and you go, "Oh man," it's more those kinds of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is my eBay book I was telling you about.
Oh, look at that. Love it.
Well, the reason it's not on my library shelf anymore is I actually had the privilege. It took months before I got the nerve of Henry being a co-host that I mailed it to him, and I had the privilege of his mother actually signing it before passing. So now it sits in my cabinet, and now I got to buy another copy so I can read.
Have you guys seen? We did a documentary for HBO that's not easy to find, called "He Has Seen War." Do you know about that?
Is that the one with Henry with a full head of hair?
I
I was giving Henry a hard time. I saw a documentary. I think it may have been the director's cut on the Pacific where he has a full head of hair. I was like,
I don't remember that. But
No, sir, I've not seen that.
Well,
I haven't seen that either.
HBO asked us. They were releasing the Pacific and Band of Brothers together as a box set
okay.
on DVD, on Blu-ray, and they asked us to make a documentary that combined the two. And they gave us carte blanche. They said, as long as it connects Band of Brothers and the Pacific, you can do whatever you want. So we decided to make a movie about how the men came home, or a documentary about how the men came home, by focusing on some of the guys that we portrayed in both series. Anyway, there's a scene where we're interviewing Jean Sledge, and she's telling us about when her and Eugene were first married, and they were driving on a road in Alabama, and they went by a possum had been run over, and Jean said to Eugene, ooh, kind of grimaced. And he said, she said, ooh, that's so horrible. And he said, and this is on film, and he said to her, oh, Shug, I've had best friends look worse than that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you can, yes, it's hard to get because they never really I don't think they ever broadcast it. And it's only available as part of the Blu-ray box set. So it's kind of hard to find, but it's really worth it. I have to say, we did it with Don Miller and about really how did the guys come home? Because we don't really deal with it at all in Band of Brothers. We do, and not really in Masters of the Air either, but in the Pacific a little bit. And because we think after World War II, the aftermath of World War II, the guys came home to the ticker tape parades, the GI Bill, and Happy Days Are Here Again, when of course it was so much more complex than that. There's no way you hold the line for months at Guadalcanal or go up time at, fly 35 missions in a B-17 or escort a convoy across the Arctic and not come home and be affected by it. There's no way.
Or in the case of Eugene, he got sent to China. Read his book, China Marine. He didn't get to come home for almost a year later. So by the time he got home, he didn't get to enjoy the celebration. It was just, another. By that point, it's just, here's another young kid in a uniform.
Guys, I am going to have to probably cut it here in a minute.
Sure.
But anything?
Yes, sir. Your personal connection to World War II. Any family?
Great question.
Dad?
No, actually, my dad was in the Korean War, but my grandparents were too old and my father was too young. So no. But I will say I've realized that how much of my professional career is wrapped around is involved with World War II, not by design, but between the 3 series we've been talking about, the attendant documentaries that we've made, my connection with both the World War II Museum and the Holocaust Museum, and other things that we have other projects that are at Playtone that are World War II related. I have to say I've been privileged to help. I realize I have help, however minor a way to help tell the story of the largest event in human history.
What's your favorite World War II movie, other than the ones you were involved with?
I wouldn't. 12 O'Clock High. Because it's a great movie. And there's a number of wonderful is not the right word, but or Best Years of Our Lives. I almost would say
yes.
The double bill is Best Years of Our Lives and 12 O'Clock High.
For sure.
But 12 O'Clock High, because, and I know one of Gregory Peck's sons pretty well, and we've talked about this. That's a movie. It's the best war movie. I think it's the best war movie because there's almost, I don't think they shot any combat footage. There's some combat footage, but it's stock War Department footage because the combat in that movie is all up here.
Right.
As it is for any man or woman who serves, I'm sure the real battle is always within. And that movie demonstrates that, dramatizes that. The battle is always within.
Wow.
Kirk,
if you don't mind, gentlemen, would you guys
just ask one question before to wrap this up, because our audience is going to be mad if I don't. Not to put you on the spot, but is there any idea of maybe doing a Navy project?
Well, I will tell you guys, we did a movie several years ago called Greyhound.
Yep.
And Greyhound 2 is in the process, is in the works.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I can't get into too much
content right there. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people, when I was in Normandy last week or 2 weeks ago, or on that trip, I should say, there were a lot of people asking about. There were a lot of big fans of Greyhound. So that's fiction. It's based on a novel, a C.S. Forster novel called The Good Shepherd. That was the first one was. And so it's the same characters, but yes, that is definitely happening.
No, I'm nobody here, but if you need any sort of information about LCI, I know a couple of guys who can help you out.
Okay.
Oh, trust me, way ahead of you, Don. We already got to him.
Zach, do you have a question?
I do. Yeah. If I could bring this full circle, just
Please.
one last question, Kirk. So a little background for the audience in order for this question to make sense is about 10 years ago when Kirk taught my class at UCLA, he brought in, speaking of pinch me moments, he brought in Rami Malek to
Oh,
be a
right.
guest speaker. And we watched an episode of The Pacific and it was terrific. But at the end of the class, Kirk asked each one of us what our favorite scene was, and we each answered it. But we didn't, from what I remember in class, Kirk, we didn't get your answer. If I can finally bring this full circle 10 years later,
Oh,
do you
wow.
have
in
a
the
favorite
Pacific?
scene out of either the Pacific or Masters of the Air? Anything you've done? Do you have a favorite scene that stands above the rest?
I probably, yeah. I'll tell you this, Band of Brothers, because on the trip I just was on, one of the actors that was on the trip as well, James Matteo, who played Frank Bricanti. My favorite moment in Band of Brothers certainly was in episode 9, and it's when Easy Company comes across the concentration camp in the woods. And they see the barbed wire and they see these emaciated people in these odd looking uniforms, and they don't know what it is. And I'll expand on this a little bit if you want me to. And they look at each other, and Major Winters was on that, even though he was no longer company commander, he was on that patrol, and they didn't know what they were looking at. And so Winters, where you see the faces of the men, and then there's a cut, and it's just it's James Matteo, Frank Briccani being sent by Winters back to headquarters because we need somebody to come out here and explain what we're looking at. And I think in some ways that's what you attempt to do in a war movie. Explain the inexplicable as much as you can. And that was the cut from what the hell is this to boom, 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 and Briccani's on his way to headquarters. That's my favorite moment in Band of Brothers.
Wow.
I remember, and I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time, but when we got to know Major Winters early on, and he came to our offices in Santa Monica at Playtone, and he spent the day with us explaining everything. He kept meticulous records, everything. But when he started to tell us about about coming across the labor camp that was part of the dockhouse system, and he said it was the one thing he couldn't explain it. He said we didn't have a frame of reference. He actually said it as if we came across a field of Martians because we didn't know what we were looking at. And this is a guy, and these were guys who had been in combat almost without relief for 9 months. They'd seen everything. They'd done it. Not, you know what I mean. And they were just shocked. So that's my favorite moment from Band of Brothers. The Pacific, I'd have to give it more thought. It would probably be something with Sledge and Snafu. And I would say, and then Masters of the Air, I think probably something from episode 9 with Rosie, and Rosie coming across another labor camp, and it was true. And that as much as anything talks about the title of the episode 9 in Band of Brothers is Why We Fight.
Mhm.
So it tends to be my favorite scenes tend to be explain why we fight.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Nate Mann, who played, I believe, Rosie Rosenthal, he did such a great job
fabulous.
portraying that character. Yeah,
It's fabulous. That was really tough
excellent.
because he was both humble and glamorous at the same time. And that's how everybody, I never got to meet Rosie, but Don Miller knew him very well. And that's what he would say, is that you can't believe that he was not only a fabulous pilot, probably the best pilot in the 100th, but he was a superb athlete. He was the captain of his college baseball and football team. Or I don't know about football, but definitely baseball. And then yet his son told us that he almost was not embarrassed, but he had to return salutes. But by the time he left, he was a major, maybe a colonel, lieutenant colonel. And So of course he had to return salutes, but he almost felt sheepish about it, and not in some uh, uh, false humility, but just because that's who he was.
Wow. That's great stuff.
And I think that's the perfect note to go out on. Kurt, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. And we
Thank you,
appreciate everything
guys.
you guys do over there at Playtone.
Thank you. Look for Greyhound too.
We'll do it. We'll have you
Thanks,
back
Kurt.
on to talk about it.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Thanks, Kurt.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good
That was
stuff.
awesome.
I
I
knew
said-
you guys would like that one.
I
Oh,
said we
he was
wrap
the
it up
best.
there. I don't think there's any reason going to what you're reading and all that. And so,
Oh, sure. That's funny. He mentioned that though. I was about to jump in and say, "Hey, we got a portion we do at the end. What are you reading?" So
Yeah, well,
that
we
was
can-
funny how he said that.
yeah,
But we don't have to. Yeah, that ran quite a bit. So,
no, that's perfect.
but
Let me just
Dennis,
let me do a quick wrap up. Thank you guys, everybody, for hanging out for another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. As always, head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com to find the images and the videos that go along with this episode and all the previous episodes. And make sure you head over to YouTube.com, search for D410 Media. And we just recently, sorry for all of our current subscribers, just added the podcast to the RSS feed for YouTube Music, which completely blew up the notifications for all you who follow us. But the good news is, if you guys are YouTube Music subscribers and you prefer that platform to get your podcast, we're there now too, as well as we're also on Amazon Music. So if you guys are Amazon subscribers and you got tired of switching to Spotify or iTunes, you can now listen to us on Amazon Music as well. Thank you guys so much. We haven't done this in a while. We want to hear from you. Email us at mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com. That is WWII.com. And email us questions, thoughts, criticisms, subject suggestions. And Dennis knows this. Zach knows it too because he was a former guest. If you have a subject that we haven't covered, you think you can help fill 45 minutes to an hour worth of time, email us at mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com. Tell us the subject matter, tell us your thoughts on it, and who knows, maybe you can be sitting in the chair and educating our audience as well. So until next time, for myself, Dennis, Zach, and Jeff Copsetta, and Kirk, of course, thank you guys so much, and we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.